Okay, we are going to go straight now to the speech. Donald Trump is speaking at the New York State Court.
This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
So there we have it. So let's recap that Donald Trump, the former president of the United States of America, has been found guilty on 34 charges related to payments made to the porn actress Stormy Daniels. I want to say to you right now what this is all about, as far as I'm concerned, the political implications, because this is a kangaroo court that somebody in Venezuela would recognise more readily than your average person in the United Kingdom or the United States of America. A district attorney, the equivalent to the Crown Prosecution Service, elected on a ticket of deliberately finding a reason to throw Donald Trump in jail. Quite improper, and something that would disbar him from making the decision had that been in the United Kingdom. George Soros, who people are critical of, has funded a whole raft of candidates who are going to file charges against Donald Trump in various states. That I find to be a ridiculous breach of any sense of propriety and decency. The judge himself was conflicted, as Donald Trump said. And Donald Trump now talks about a divided nation, a nation in decline, and a rigged system from the start. And who could disagree? In reality, whether the money paid to Stormy Daniels was real or fictional and who authorised it is really not relevant to the case as far as I'm concerned. What is relevant is the fact that this has been falsely claimed to be some form of campaign donation, that they've decided to believe Michael Cohen, a man who's been convicted multiple times of lying, and by the way, did a deal to keep himself in prison for less time by talking about Donald Trump, apparently in an honest fashion, but we'll never know that. There's a maximum 4-year term of every single one of these charges, and there are 34 of them. I have to say, this is a dark day for the United States of America, a dark day for democracy, and it should be a dark day for you, whether you agree with Donald Trump politically or not, because some people will be cock-a-hoop, but what we are talking about now is the same as what happens in third world nations, where the law is used to illegally and falsely and erroneously charge people who've been involved in politics. The criminalisation of politics is a dangerous thing. It's something that should not be allowed. And the political left do what the political left do, which is attempt to jail their opponents. They do it in every country, every time they get any power. And this is the latest example of it. I find the whole thing thoroughly depressing, Asher.
Yeah, well, this is unprecedented, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, this is a whole nother level. We saw it over here, didn't we? We can't really talk about that. But Boris Johnson, Donald Trump's tone, he sounded totally down, didn't he? I've never heard him like that, and it's actually bigger than the actual story itself, isn't it? For what's happening to the democratic country of the states.
And I mean, look, we won't give specific examples because of regulations during this time, but we are seeing increasingly in Britain attempts to criminalise politics, find ways of filing criminal charges against political opponents. It is harder to do in Britain because the Crown Prosecution Service is crap, but it is also neutral. So, so at least it's.
But I've never seen him like that, speaking like that. He did seem very. Normally he'd be on fire when something like that happens, but he seemed very down, didn't he, about it?
Yeah, this is. Why don't we bring in our guest co-hosts this evening, Anna McGovern and Phil Dave, and just put that question first to you, Phil. How did you think he sounded? Deflated?
Deflated is a superb way of describing it. Deflated, and also, I'd imagine, quite shell-shocked as well. You know, there's one thing that Donald Trump has in abundance, and that's arrogance. And I can't help but think that arrogance that he possesses in such abundance probably has been quite heavily blown this evening, should we say?
Yeah, he probably was sure he was going to win.
Well, but I think
this afternoon for him, I should say.
I think most people watching and listening to this would agree with the basic proposition that if Donald Trump had an affair with Stormy Daniels and she was given money by Donald Trump's lawyers and that bill was later passed on to the Trump organisation, then Donald Trump must have had some knowledge of the payments, and it must be in order to shut her up. However, why this is relevant appears to be it was a way of putting Donald Trump in prison.
Maybe, but
I don't think anybody cares, do they?
But at the same time, I wonder whether or not maybe we need to look at it from a slightly different perspective, and that is actually the idea of hush money, because ultimately when someone pays someone off, they are taking a gamble. And the truth is that this is a gamble that clearly hasn't paid off for Donald Trump.
It's not illegal to pay hush money, though.
It
just isn't.
It's not so much a case of it's illegal, but I mean, I guess it depends if you see it as bribery.
Well, it was the election expenses, wasn't it? That they
But most times that anybody signs one of these hush money agreements, and let's be clear, the American star who was most famous for them was Michael Jackson, and what each contract would say, without admitting any liability, I'm willing to pay you this payment as a gesture of goodwill. Now, there will be people who will say that Michael Jackson's payments to all of these kids indicated his guilt, but at the end of the day, the actual contract said, I am not
same as Prince Andrew.
I'm not accepting anything.
But don't you think, though, that this actually sort of highlights just how ridiculous it is that we live in a day and age where people can pay large sums of money if they happen to have that amount of money in order to sort of somehow buy their privacy?
But you could always buy the best solicitors, can't you?
I know. I'm not saying that that it's.
I
don't want to come across as someone who's jealous of someone who has a lot of money.
No, I have to say,
you're right though. I mean, that's how O.J. Simpson hired the best lawyers.
I have to say to you, and I don't want to explain in full the incident, but I will say that I've done it myself. I went and I stayed the no. This.
But I've forgiven you now.
No, this is quite funny. I stayed the hotel in Bournemouth, and things got quite drunken late at night, and I paid a £1,000 gesture of goodwill without admitting liability for any damage to the hotel.
But then the other way you could look at that.
Any roadblocks.
Yeah, but the difference is the way you could look at that is that let's just say that it was a bit of a drunken mishap where some damage was incurred. The fact is that money would cover that damage.
Yes.
I'm not being funny, but when you're talking about an individual whose feelings have been hurt or something like that, or is trying to sort of get over themselves or what have you, that's very different to paying them just to basically get their mouth shut, which is ultimately what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, in the case of when things are actually criminal, it is worrying, and I don't want to go on about Michael Jackson, but it's just a good example where the police were incredibly frustrated because people had signed all sorts of contracts with him on the civil side that made criminal prosecution of him basically not possible.
Smooth criminal.
Yeah. Oh dear, oh dear.
Okay, right. The number is 0344 499 1000. We think we're probably at the end of what's going to take place in New York now. Yeah, I think we are really, because Donald Trump has spoken. We'll bring you all the updates that we've got, but it's 34 charges, obviously 34 convictions. Donald Trump has left. No doubt there will be an appeal, and it will go all the way.